Hey everyone, and welcome back to Nerd Center. And as you can see today, we're going to be talking about how characters like John Diggle show that the race swapping of characters from the comics to the movies or shows is unnecessary. Now, you might be wondering, why John Diggle? Why is he this big character? What has he got to do with anything? Well, recently the CW shows, yes, I still keep up with some of them, but the CW shows had John Diggle, who was originally on appearing in all of the Arrowverse shows that were left, considering he does not longer have a main starring role in any show now that Arrow is over. So this just happened recently, and it kind of brought this kind of thought topic to my mind about how John Diggle is an original black character who was introduced and made for the show Arrow. Now, granted, he did later move on into the comic books, but this was all after his debut in the original show. So, as you know, in today's world, many of our characters, when transitioning from the comic pages of the comic books to the small screen of the TVs or the big screen for the movies, are being race swapped, gender swapped, and the like, to, as they fit a more representation of the world, even when you get characters that make absolutely no sense for doing so. And a really good example coming up is a Black Superman movie we're going to be getting, which we'll get into more than that in a minute. But they always say they need more representation, they need more representation, and then people come up with say, well, instead of changing characters, why don't you just create a new one, or use one of the backlogs of hundreds and hundreds of characters in all of Marvel and DC that are black or female or whatever the case may be. But they may not always say it out loud, but their thing is that they don't feel like people are going to accept these new characters because we can't just use some random new character, we have to do someone who's well known. That's the only way that it's going to make impact. Really? Well, here's a good example right here of John Diggle. Now, feel how you will about the CW shows. I granted they severely gone downhill since the early days. I mean, we got some good seasons of couple of good seasons of Arrow. We got one good season of Flash. Superman Lois is a different thing, and we'll talk about that actually in a separate video. But basically, the CW shows have not been doing that great. But it's really a good example because despite that, Diggle was still a good character in Arrow, and it really shows that you can make a successful, prominent in the show, minority or black or female, whatever character, an original character, and make them work. Now, he was in from season 1 through the whole show. He was right there with Oliver, his guy, they were, his partner, his best friend, his brother in the show. So, he was a prominent role. He was, Oliver, someone looked up to, respected. And so they wrote him well like that, he was a good character. And they just seem to overlook things like this. And another good example of showing where they say this is in the recent He-Man show that just seems like a mess when you hear about all the things going on about it. But this new He-Man show that's coming out on Netflix, and they've apparently race swapped some of the characters, like I believe the King it was, and they said they wanted to do it because they were the prominent characters. They didn't want to just had too many white guys, so they wanted to change one and something like that. And just making a new character or featuring the other kind of smaller black character I believe they had, that wasn't enough for them, because the characters, the audience won't take to these new characters. It takes time, and it's like, well, if you write a good character and you could put him in the story and the audience would work with it, add him to the lore, build his story, write him right. That's the trick, you have to write him right. But it can be done, and their argument is just really stupid when they come at you and say that people won't accept it because a character like John Diggle is someone who can show you that it is. He was well received enough by the fans and everyone watching that he made his way from the TV show into the comics, which I don't always for, but sometimes it works. And it's really, shows that characters like that can work. If you look at, original black characters, not thinking of just, he doesn't really more like a Black Panther or a Falcon, because they're too, like, original, like comic. They're like that in the comics, so like they're just taking them as they are in the setting. And those are two of the most prominent black characters in Marvel, and so they're like rightly so popular. But Diggle was created for this, like he was a brand new character. So it shows that these characters are already good without you having to change them. Like looking at Falcon, Falcon was already his own character. He was Falcon. He was like one of the second main black character in Marvel, in that, he wasn't good enough just being Falcon. He had to be Captain America. It's just like the YouTuber Young Rippa says, they only see the legitimacy of the white characters, like taking the mantle away from Steve Rogers, or, Superman being switched to black. That's the only way that these people who are just so social justice heavy, so representation heavy, that's all they care about instead of the stories and the characters and the lore, they only see these as a win, as if they can make the white characters whatever they want. It's not good enough to just have representation with like black characters or women and things like that in the show. They have to be this kind of thing, or otherwise it's not good enough. And so they always make these arguments. That's why we can't have, and they use these arguments to say that you can't have, original characters, because they just don't work. People won't accept them, so we have to make them a character they know. But really, it's really just ticking people off that you're changing the characters they do like, with just for these reasons, no other reason why, usually, in the story for story purposes. And then it shows that people will accept it, but they just refuse to do this, and it's just crazy how many times, and it's honestly just getting worse and worse with the amount of race and gender swaps that we're getting. The Eternals, basically the entire Eternals is race and gender swapped, and there's just so many things. And then we look at the new Superman movie that they're coming out with, that they're going to have a black Superman. Now, I don't know if it's going to be Val-Zod Superman, which in one sense is his own character, but is just basically a alternate Earth Superman, so it's not really a new character. And I get the feeling they're probably not. It's probably going to be a black Clark Kent. It's not going to be Val-Zod or one of these other alternate universes. It's going to be like Superman, but he's black, just because. And it's just completely unnecessary, and probably will force in a bunch of other stuff instead of making it about Superman, who just happens to be black, which, they won't do that. They're probably going to shove in a whole bunch of other crap, and it's just not going to work out. There'll be people that'll praise it, and this is about time, but, ultimately it's not going to, things like that don't pan out, and people are starting to see through this crap. Not as many as you'd hope. There's still a lot of people who will take whatever it is. And then there's people who don't know the comics, and they don't even know better than a lot of these characters. Think of, like, from just MCU. Heimdall, Valkyrie, those are just from Thor's movies that are, white in the comics. And so there's so many characters that they probably have no idea are like that. Or even Nick Fury, which, technically Nick Fury in Ultimate Universe is black, and that's kind of what he's based on, and they kind of changed it in the comics and made a new Nick Fury Jr., but, Nick Fury is white, originally. So, like, there's so many characters that people recognize like that, because that's what they showed them in the movies, but then there's a lot of comic folks who are like, hey, that's not how they are in the comics. Because they assume this just because you just don't want these things, because you don't like black people, and that's not the case, because I like a lot of the characters who are, like Luke Cage is one of my favorite black characters, Storm, really great. Those are two of my favorite characters, and they happen to be black. And it's like, people don't, as much as they say, sure, there's racists out there, but like most people, they're not like that. And then when they come out with these movies and change them, people are upset because they change the characters and they're not accurate to the comics, which is what they're wanting, is to see live action depictions of the comics, not reimagined version that the director wanted to reimagine. They want a comic accurate thing. And there's nothing wrong with asking for comic accuracy. I get that there's some things you might want to tweak because they might be a little weird in live action. Little things, but the character should, one, look like the character. They should, costume, body type, look, hair, they should look like the character as much as possible. And two, the character should act like the character, which does not always happen. These are things that people want in the comics, and it's rightly so, because, they care about these comics. And, what is the point of seeing this loose depiction of this character that we like when we can have the real version? And instead of giving us, a new character, and whether it's because they feel like they don't see the legitimacy of this, or from the fact that they're just not creative enough to create a new character. And then you say, well, what if the characters they've created in comics in the last few years, but see, if you look, most of those characters that they've created are just swaps of the other characters that, already held these mantles. Like, think of, Ironheart is just taking Iron Man's mantle. It's not a new character, so to speak. Or, making Hulk Amadeus Cho, that's still a Hulk. Or, making Falcon Cap. Well, that's still an original character you already had, but you've changed him to be, another Captain America when he was already his own character, who stood for a lot of this in the same values as Captain America and was Captain America's friend and ally and right up there with Captain America, but that's not good enough for them. And as you see, they had to go back from in the comics to Steve Rogers because people didn't like Sam taking the mantle. And so I'm sure that they'll keep it a lot longer in the movies, most likely. But, back to the original point, a character like John Diggle really shows what can be done if people actually try to be creative. They'll actually try to respect the source material some. Now, granted, Arrow is not comic accurate because he's basically Batman. And like I said, I'm not going to jump into the, finer details of the Arrowverse because there's plenty to talk about there, and it's not anything super great for the most part in later years. But just looking at a single character like John Diggle, this is a good example of how to do this the right way, and to take away the need to do things like race swapping your characters, so that they can either make new ones or take characters who may not even be as well known, and if you write them well and you work with them, you could make a character, original black character, original female character, whatever, already in the comics, and make them a good character for the show or movie or whatever the case may be. And as we know, Diggle he's coming back, he doesn't have a show. So there's things, we'll just touch on the fact that he's got basically in the Crisis on Infinite Earths thing that happened. He has the Green Lantern ring now. Or it's not really official, no one's seen it, but we know it's the Green Lantern ring. And I believe that there is a Green Lantern show in the works on HBO Max, and I don't know if this is revolving around Diggle or if it's going to be, Hal and John Stewart. And, we already have a John Green Lantern, John Stewart, so I don't know if he's going to be kind of taking over as the John Stewart for the Green Lantern, or if he's going to be in addition to, I don't know. My guess is they're not going to waste this because they've been kind of hinting at it, so I'm sure we're going to get some kind of payoff as to him being Green Lantern. I don't know what, but it'll be interesting to see. Anyways, thank y'all for watching, and if you like this video, thanks for watching, and give it a like. And if you're interested in subscribing to the channel, please do so, and I'll see you guys next time.